Welcome to the Buff Show. Today we have me and Ben Larson going over 1031 exchanges. What you got for me, Ben?
Well, first thing is, which camera am I looking at, Mickey? This one or that one? This one's on you. That one's on me, so focus on that one. And then
look
talk
at this
to
one
payment.
so you look funny when we do the
Right,
race.
like some sideways. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we're doing basically a mile-high overview of a 1031 exchange. And Peyton has graciously let me run this one. So, Peyton, will you read the definition? the boring, cold, dry cut of what a 1031 is?
Yeah. So 1031 exchange is a real estate investing tool that allows investors to swap out investment properties for another one and defer capital gains or losses or capital gains tax that allows or that you otherwise would have to pay at the time of sale.
What that means is basically if you're going to get hit with capital gains on like an investment property, this allows you to either trade it to another property, upgrade to a cleaner, newer property that may be the exact same amount or more, and you're not getting rid of the taxes, you're deferring the taxes for a later time. We'll get into that later. But
what's capital gains?
Capital gains is basically the government wants a cut of anything you make, especially if it's an investment and not a primary property. Mm-hmm. But it is any money that you've made in, I don't know actually what the real definition of capital gains is.
It's like any gain, like they do it on stocks, like any gain you have in an investment, they tax it. So like if you have an investment property and you buy it for $300 and you sell it for $500, you had a $200,000 gain.
And that's a capital gain.
That's the capital
That's what
gain.
makes it a capital gain.
Yeah.
Is it's investment.
And then there's a state and federal tax on top of that you have to pay depending on your tax bracket. And we're not accountants to go into all that, but there would be taxes that you would have to pay on it.
Basically, a capital gains is if you do what you're supposed to do with your money, the government wants their cut. And then there's rules in our tax code that, like this 1031, that will help you defer that to a later time and then essentially, and in some cases, even delete it when you die and pass it on to your heirs. So.
Yeah. So a few things I wanted to bring up is a 1031 exchange is only for investment properties. I get people all the time like, I'm going to sell my house that we've lived in for the past 5 years, and we're going to do a 1031 exchange. And it's like, you can't do a 1031 exchange on a primary house.
And a lot of times you don't want to, because if it's your primary house, you get a exemption of $250,000 per person if you're single, or $500 if you're married on capital gains.
Yep.
So
there is if it's a primary residence, you do have that tax shelter, and a lot of people like that covers most of their gains. I am seeing some people with more than that. There are ways to get creative and maybe get around it, and that's an episode for another day, or just call one of us. You can get creative with these. We're just doing a mile-high overview of what the 1031 exchange is and what it looks like.
Is this something for you?
Yeah.
You know?
So, for example, I had clients a few years ago. They had a property in Hawaii they wanted to sell, and I think they sold it. It was just under $1 million. And they're like, we want to trade this investment property in Hawaii, and we want to buy some property in Utah. So 1031 exchange rules is it just has to be like kind. So I can't remember if it was I think it was just a house in Hawaii that they sold. And they could have bought land, they could have bought commercial property, they could have bought a duplex, they could have bought a single family house.
Like in kind, and that's loosely translated, basically investment to investment.
Right.
But it has to be a real property.
Yeah,
So.
real property, investment related. Like it doesn't even have to generate income, like land you could 1031 into.
Essentially, land is an investment. I mean, you sit on it, and it might not be cash flow and generating, but you sit on it long enough, and it's going to appreciate.
Yeah. So how it worked with them is they sold that, and they were very proactive. We're going to get into the rules of a 1031 exchange, but they were very proactive, and they knew that they were doing a 1031 exchange even before it happened. And obviously, you have to know that, otherwise you can't do a 1031 exchange.
That is like the main step. The very first step of a 1031 exchange is, am I going to do it?
Right.
It's not going to sell the house first, then think about it. Is it something that's going to work for me, and am I going to do it?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because if you sell a house, get your funds, and then like, oh, I'm in a 1031 exchange. Like
way too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
Like you can't do it.
You
You're
came
paying
in
tax
the ninth inning, and
yeah. So I guess rule number one is you have to know you're doing a 1031 exchange well in advance. You have to have what's called an intermediary. So when your investment property closes, you say, hey, we're going to do a 1031 exchange. And then at closing, they send all the funds to that intermediary.
Yep.
The funds go there. You don't get them. You don't touch them. They go right there.
Yep. And the intermediary is basically someone at a title company, or they will hold your funds, because once you've declared that you're going to do a 1031, you're locked in. You don't get those funds back until your 1031 timeframes expire.
Yeah.
So do I have to? A lot of people say, like, do I have to tell my seller or my buyer that I'm going to do a 1031 exchange? And you do. You have to inform them.
Yeah.
It's a form you have. If they say no and they don't want you to do a 1031, you can still do them. That's another day, another time. But you do have to
Inform.
let them know your intent to do a
Yeah.
1031.
So on the property you're selling, there's a addendum you put in there. We're going to do a 1031 exchange. And then what? So
So 1031, you got to, first things, you identify, you got to let people know you're going to do a 1031, get that in place, get your house sold. And in that process, you need, from the day you close on your home, you have 45 days to identify a property. And that is as simple as sending a text message to your intermediary. Like, you could take a picture from the street, you could send them a listing and say, hey, this one, hey, this one, hey, this one. And you have to identify it. Once you identify that property, you have 180 days to close on it.
Yeah.
On the new property with your funds.
From the day of closing.
From the day of closing.
Not
Now,
identifying.
a lot of people think that 45 days is identified, then you get 180 days. Your 180 days start on the day of closing till the day you have to close on the new property, and that 45 days stays right in the start of it. So, and here's another thing that a lot of people get when they're making that decision to do 1031, their money's locked up. So you got to be serious about you want to do this, because in that first 45 days, if you decide, hey, you know what, I don't want to do this, I want my money back, you cannot get it back till day 46.
Right.
And if you decide on day 46 you don't want to do this, it's day 181 before you get your money back,
Right.
before they can release it.
Yeah.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah. So there's no backing out until you wait that time frame, which can be crucial for a lot of people. So if you're going to do one, like, make sure you have a game plan in place. Going back to these clients out of California, they were selling a property. The cool thing is, when you doing a 1031 exchange, the government just has a few rules. They want it to be like kind, so another form of investment property. And then they want the value to be equal to or greater than the property that you sold. So I think their value was like $800,000. These guys ended up buying 3 properties to get their valuation up. They bought a condo in Eden that they did nightly rentals with.
Okay.
And then we bought a townhome in, I think it was in Clearfield, that they did like a long-term rental with. And then we bought a townhome in Mountain Green. So they bought 3 townhomes, and that valuation got them over
The 800,000.
The 800,000. And there are ways, again, we're not accountants, but there are ways that you can purchase real estate less than the replacement or the relinquished property that you sold. You just have to pay taxes on what's called the boot. But that's getting deeper than we want to get right here.
So just to touch on what Peyton said, so they went from one property to 3. So in that same token, if they were in Utah already and they're like, man, we really want to get to Hawaii, they could sell these 3 properties and go back into 1.
Right.
So it's there is rules, but they're very lax for the most part on investment, what you are identifying. So
the biggest thing that we worked on, like, these guys knew they were doing a 1031 while they were in contract on selling their property in Hawaii. We already had everything under contract ready to go by the time that property closed. Their properties were already identified. So that 45-day rule was like, we weren't stressing that much because it was already like in motion. I feel like some people are like, we're going to sell this, we're going to do a 1031 exchange, and then they start looking day 1 of their 45-day period. And that, like, you're just cutting it close. Like, why not have everything locked up? And identifying a property, like, nowadays you identify something and it could be gone the next day. So just get it tied up under contract. You have the right to purchase it And I think you can identify up to 3 properties, and you just
Yep.
have to close on at least one of them.
Yep.
They identified 3 and bought 3.
Right. So what he's saying essentially is before these guys even closed on their initial home, they already were out looking and pre-looking at properties, got them under contract. I'm assuming contingent to sell on their Hawaii home.
Yeah.
So when they said, "Hey, let's do this 1031," it was like, close on Hawaii, and then the very next day or a couple of days later, close on these other 3 properties, and it wasn't like this stressful. We got 45 days. We gotta hurry. I'm making high pressure situation decisions.
Yeah, because I mean, the second if you're a buyer, you sold a property and you have to do a 1031 exchange, or you're going to pay, a ton of money in taxes. Like the second a seller catches wind of that, and like they know.
Yeah, then they've got the chips. So they'll hold you out until you give what they want.
Yeah, they'll string you along, and so it's just better to be ahead of the game and have things laid out and figured out there.
So once we do a 1031 and I do all these, so I don't have to pay Uncle Sam because no one likes paying him. It's just gone. I never have to pay it.
No.
What if I sell the next property?
Then the gains that you rolled over, you'd have to pay taxes on. You're just deferring it.
So that is one thing that I want to be very clear with a lot of people. You're not getting rid of your taxes, and you're deferring it to the next property. And then from there, if you do it again, you're deferring it to the next property.
But is there a loophole?
Well, there is. But before we get to the loophole, I just want to touch. A lot of people, it makes sense to do a 1031 so they're not paying taxes. However, if there's ever a time in the foreseeable future for you where you're thinking, I just gonna want the whole cold hard cash from these investments. When you start this 1031 game, it's a long game, or you're going to be recapturing the depreciation later on. We're just kicking the can down the road. Now, that saying from some of the classes we've taken and trainings we've done on it is you kick the can down the road until you're dead.
Yeah.
Because how it works is you just keep deferring these taxes, right? And when you die, your heirs or your kids or whoever the heck you're leaving it to, they go to market value on these new homes, right?
Yeah.
So they say, okay, you bought it for $300, and now your son's selling it for $500. Well, that market value is $500 because he's selling it for $500, so that's his basis. So he didn't make anything.
They get a step up.
And it's a step up in basis, yep.
And then they get like that. I think there's a limit. It might be $2 million in gains or something. Don't quote me on that, but you get
call us. We've got some actual professionals on this because there's actual divisions of title companies and stuff that are 1031.
Yeah, but we have done it. We've helped people with it. It is an awesome strategy if you are an investor wanting to upgrade, or a lot of investors will depreciate their properties, and then once they run out of depreciation, then they're like, okay, I need to buy something else. Yep. So this is an easy way to get another property, get your depreciation back on that new property.
Well, and
just trade up.
We talk about avoiding capital gains and stuff, but say you buy a townhome for $400,000, you depreciate it over a set amount of time, and then you sell it for $400,000, right? Why would I do a 1031? Well, the reason why is if I am depreciating it over time and I sell it back again at 400, I have to recapture that depreciation still.
Yeah.
Well, with people who need that depreciation and stuff in different businesses and whatnot, they will buy a new property, 400 for 400, no money change. Well, now there's 100% depreciation
on that new one.
New one.
Yeah.
So
like even though they didn't have a lot of gains they were rolling over, they still got a whole new tax
basically
advantage.
They reset their depreciable.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of these guys that have like apartment complexes, like that's why they'll keep them for like 10 years and they'll rapid depreciate them, and then they'll be like, hey, max that out, like we need another one.
Yep.
And there's so many ways with investment properties. Like I always, like if you needed your money out, like there's other ways to get it, like do a cash out refi.
Yep.
Like that's tax free. Take the money out.
Yep.
Like you don't have to just sell a property to get your money out. Get a HELOC. Like there's a bunch of different ways. So like I'm definitely in it for the long haul, but if you are somebody that's selling an investment property and you're like, yeah, we don't love real estate, and you're thinking about doing a 1031 exchange, like it might just make sense to pay the taxes now.
Call us. We'll talk you through with options and see what work best for your situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many strategies here, and that's the crazy thing. And you have to be careful if you have a primary house that you've lived in for 2 out of the past 5 years, but then you turn it into a rental for 5 years, like you actually lose that primary status, and then you would have to pay gains on it. So there's so many strategies here and things to be aware of. So just call us. We can help brainstorm with you. And if we don't know the answer,
We have a team.
we know people that do, and we can connect you with the right people and get those answers taken care of. But hopefully this gives you a good mile-high view of what a 1031 exchange is and some of the applications on why you'd want to use it and stuff like that. So
Seriously, call, because we had a guy just the other day. He wanted to sell a building and buy land, and somebody told him he had to build a new building on the land in the 180 days.
yeah, you're like,
He's
no.
like, I just can't do that, and I didn't know until we did our training. And
Right.
I was like, man, this is awesome, and
It's a game changer.
now he's doing it. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
So call in if you have questions. We'll figure it out. We have a good network. So
Yep. Thanks, guys.